During the liquidation of the narrow Russian penetration near Dobropilliaby, our defense forces, several brigades of the Russian army, may be encircled at once. This was stated by military expert Mikhail Zhirokhov on the air of Radio NV. At the same time, according to him, the Russians are continuing this tactic and have organized 3 more guts on the front line in Dnepropetrovsk region. The situation near Dobropillia is clear. The Russians were unable to cope with the cover of this gut that they pulled out to the Dobropillia area, and now they are getting it in the neck after the General Staff transferred the most combat-ready units here. The Dobropolye gut, it will be eliminated in the near future if the situation does not change dramatically. Several brigades may even end up in a cauldron there. They will have no chance, Zhirokhov commented. However, he added that this may not happen if the situation changes and, for example, the General Staff is not forced to transfer the Azov Corps to another direction. In a month of active hostilities near Dobropillia, Donetsk region, Ukrainian units from the Azov Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine and adjacent formations captured 69 Russian infantrymen. According to official statements, the active actions of Ukrainian forces allow them to hold positions, deter the enemy's advance, and stabilize the situation on the front. The captured Russian servicemen expressed gratitude to the defenders for preserving their lives and pledged to abide by the Geneva Conventions during detention. The Russian armed forces attack failed. The defense forces stabilized the situation, and these soldiers were just lucky to survive. They were taken prisoner by soldiers of the 4th Operational Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine, Rubies, and the 82nd Separate Air Assault Bukovina Brigade, 1st Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine, Azov. The total number of prisoners for the month stands at 69 occupiers. It is also noted that as of September the 5th, more than 2,400 Russian military personnel have been destroyed since the breakthrough near Dobropillia. In August, deep state analysts noted a significant turning point in the movement of Russian formations north of Dobropillia, between Dobropillia and Druskivka, pointing to gaps in Ukrainian defense and the enemy's attempts to quickly consolidate. On August the 12th, the 1st Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine, Azov, reported the occupation of a defensive strip on the Pokrovsky direction and intensified measures to block the enemy. According to the press center of the Defense Forces of Ukraine, several Russian infantrymen breached the first line, but were destroyed by reserves of the defense forces. This is absolutely not how it looks on the map. It's not that they took control of the entire route they had traveled. No, they traveled along the route and tried to hide somewhere in a basement. But of course, reserves from Ukrainian forces then rushed there to drive them out of that basement and destroy them, said spokesperson for the OSUV Dnipro on August the 21st. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported the clearance of 6 settlements on the Pokrovsky direction. As of September the 8th, Ukrainian forces liberated about 25.5 square kilometers of territory near Dobropillia, while the occupiers retained control over approximately 13.5 square kilometers. Expert assessments emphasize the dynamic and exhausting situation on the front. Ukrainian formations continue defense and counter-offensive actions aimed at reducing enemy activity and preserving the lives of their military personnel. Since the beginning of its full-scale military invasion in Ukraine, Russian authorities have pursued a strategy that sought to preserve a sense of normalcy in Russian society and convince the population that the invasion would not have any repercussions on safety in the country. However, just as the Russian-Chechen wars ultimately resulted In militant attacks on Moscow and other cities in the early 2000s, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has spilled over deep into Russian territory, undermining the government's promises. Russian authorities consistently attempted to domestically frame the invasion as a special military operation, short and victorious. But over 3 years into the invasion, its consequences for Russia's domestic security situation proved to be multifaceted and far-reaching. The spillover of the conflict has seen thousands of civilian casualties in Russia's border regions due to cross-border shelling, incursions by armed groups made up of Russian anti-government fighters, and a mutiny attempt by the head of Russian state-sponsored private military company, the Wagner Group. There have also been other, less visible effects that are likely to leave a long-lasting impact on security in Russia, including the mobilization of pro-Ukrainian partisan groups, easier access to lethal weapons, and the intensification of state violence against anti-war voices. Official statistics from the Russian Interior Ministry confirm the worst fears. Putin's army, which has partially returned home, has brought the war with it. Violence, terrorist attacks, and serious crimes are breaking historical records, turning the country into a zone of constant threat. The military hysteria of Russian propagandists, the instilled atmosphere of hatred and snitching are also poisoning the minds of Russians. The Moscow Times reported recently that according to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, 170.8 thousand serious and especially serious crimes were registered in the country in the first quarter of 2025 alone. This is the maximum for the entire period since the start of the full-scale war with Ukraine. The growth compared to last year was more than 13%. Large cities and depressed regions are seeing sharp spikes in violence, and society is increasingly becoming a victim of its own war heroes. Experts have long warned that the mass release of criminals from the front, whom the Kremlin used as cannon fodder, would boomerang. Now these former convicts and mentally traumatized soldiers are returning home not with victory but with weapons, post-traumatic stress disorder, and a sense of impunity. For many, the war is not over. It has simply moved from the trenches to the streets of Russian cities. In parallel with the growth of domestic and organized crime, Russia is breaking records for the number of terrorist attacks. In 2024, the Ministry of Internal Affairs recorded 1,191 terrorist crimes, an absolute maximum since the beginning of records. And already in January to February 2025, 451 terrorist attacks were committed, almost 10 times more than a year ago. Moreover, the statistics include not only real attacks, but also arson attacks on military registration and enlistment offices and acts of civil protest, interpreting them as terrorism. Putin's adventure has long since gone beyond the Donbass and Crimea. It has moved to Magadan, Omsk, Novosibirsk, and the Moscow region, and now every Russian risks becoming its new victim. Not from a Ukrainian missile, but from a neighbor in the building, who has returned from the front with a medal and a dark thirst for violence.